The stillness of a late Tennessee afternoon was something I had come to appreciate over the years. The sound of a far-off bird, the distant hum of insects, even the wind rustling through the leaves, all of it made the world feel just a little bit safer. But that quiet was broken when the distress call came in, piercing the routine with an urgency that pulled me and my team into motion. We were stationed at a forward operating base, performing quick reaction force duties when the call came through. A classified facility, deep in a remote section of a national park, was in trouble. They needed help, and they needed it fast. As a Green Beret, you learn to expect the unexpected. We had been on dozens of missions across Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and even parts of Africa, each one bringing its own set of challenges. But this mission felt different from the start. Captain Mason Caldwell, our team leader, was quick to assess the situation. He was a seasoned veteran, the kind of guy who had seen it all and didn't rattle easily. Yet, I noticed a flicker of unease in his eyes as we prepped for deployment. The details of the distress signal were sparse, almost deliberately vague, which was never a good sign. We piled into our transport, the drone of the helicopter's rotors filling the silence as we sped toward the national park. I sat across from the medic, a big, stocky guy from Brooklyn who had played football before joining the military. He had seen his share of action, patched up more men than I could count, but even he looked tense. Something about this mission had us all on edge. Maybe it was the park's reputation, a place known for its disappearances, trails that were mysteriously closed off, stories whispered around campfires, but never officially acknowledged. It was the kind of place where bad things happened, and no one ever talked about them. When we touched down at the park's edge, the first thing that hit me was the silence. The kind of silence that presses down on you, making you feel like you're being watched. There were no birds, no insects, nothing. Just the sound of our boots crunching on the gravel as we met up with Ranger Ethan Harper. He was a wiry guy in his mid-40s, balding with the look of someone who'd rather be anywhere but here. He greeted us with a nod, but his eyes kept darting to the trees, like he expected something to leap out at us any second. "Whatever you do, don't split up," Harper said, his voice low and urgent. "These woods, they're not right. I've been working here for years, and I've seen things I can't explain. Just stick together and don't wander off the path." I exchanged a glance with the medic, who shrugged, but I could see the tension in his jaw. Captain Caldwell gave a short nod and led us into the woods, Harper trailing behind like a man condemned. The trees loomed tall around us, their branches creating a canopy that blocked out most of the fading light. The deeper we went, the thicker the air seemed to become, as if the forest itself was closing in on us. As we approached the facility, the first sign that something was wrong was the broken security fence. A place like this, with its high-tech security measures, shouldn't have been breached so easily. We moved cautiously, weapons at the ready, scanning for any sign of movement. The facility was nestled deep in the forest, hidden from prying eyes. But now it stood vulnerable, exposed. The gate had been torn off its hinges, and beyond it, the ground was littered with debris, pieces of equipment, torn clothing, and what looked like blood. Captain Caldwell motioned for us to fan out and secure the perimeter, but the eerie silence was unnerving. I felt the weight of my weapon, my senses heightened, every nerve on edge. The medic muttered something under his breath, a prayer maybe, as we stepped through the gate and into the courtyard. The place looked like a war zone. There were bodies, guards mostly, some in pieces, others barely recognizable. The walls were splattered with blood, dark streaks that painted a gruesome picture of what had happened here. Inside the facility, the scene was even worse. The lights flickered, casting long, ominous shadows down the corridors. The smell hit us first, metallic and sharp, the unmistakable stench of death. We moved through the halls, the only sound the soft thud of our boots on the blood-slicked floor. It was clear that whatever had happened here had been fast and brutal. There were no signs of a struggle, just pure, unadulterated carnage. We found more bodies, scientists, from the looks of their lab coats, and a few more guards, all of them torn apart as if by some wild animal. But this was no animal attack. The wounds were too precise, too deliberate. Captain Caldwell paused by a door, his hand resting on the handle. He turned to us, his face set in a grim mask. "This wasn't an accident," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Whatever did this, it's still here." His words hung in the air, heavy and foreboding. We all knew what that meant. We were no longer the hunters. We were the hunted. And whatever was out there in the dark, it was waiting for us. The deeper we ventured into that forsaken facility, the more the air seemed to thicken with dread. It was as if the walls themselves had absorbed the fear and violence that had erupted here, now exuding it in every flicker of the failing lights. The bloodstains on the floors and walls told a story of brutal, unrelenting carnage, and as we moved from room to room, the extent of the slaughter became horrifyingly clear. Bodies were strewn about in grotesque positions, their faces frozen in expressions of terror, limbs twisted unnaturally, as if whatever had attacked them took a perverse pleasure in their pain. We came across the medic kneeling beside one of the dead scientists, his normally steady hands trembling as he examined the body. The man's chest was ripped open, his insides spilled out like a grotesque display of some morbid art. The medic's voice was low, almost reverent, as he spoke. "These wounds, they're precise, like someone, or something, knew exactly how to inflict the maximum amount of damage. This wasn't just a killing, it was a massacre." Captain Mason Caldwell didn't respond immediately. He just stared down at the body, his jaw clenched, eyes narrowing in what I knew was a combination of anger and disbelief. This mission, already shrouded in mystery, was quickly turning into something none of us were prepared for. And the more we uncovered, the more questions arose, each one more unsettling than the last. We pressed on, our senses heightened, every creak of the building making us tighten our grip on our weapons. We finally reached a large reinforced door at the end of a long corridor. It was slightly ajar, light spilling out into the dark hallway. Captain Caldwell signaled for us to take positions, and then with a slow, deliberate push, he opened the door fully. Inside was a lab, larger than any we had seen so far. Computers, beakers, and scientific equipment lay in disarray, some still flickering with power. But what caught our attention was the figure huddled in the corner, a man in a lab coat, his face pale and slick with sweat, his eyes wide with fear. He looked up as we entered, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The lab technician, what was left of him, anyway, was a mess of nerves. He had the look of someone who had witnessed something so far beyond his comprehension that his mind was fraying at the edges. Captain Caldwell approached him cautiously, but with the authority of someone who needed answers and needed them now. "What happened here?" Caldwell's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, the kind of tone that brooked no nonsense. The technician flinched at the question, his eyes darting between us and the door as if expecting something or someone to burst through at any moment. "It got out," he whispered, his voice hoarse and trembling. We thought we could control it, but we were wrong. So wrong." He broke off, choking on his words as he buried his face in his hands. "The experiments, they were supposed to push the boundaries, to make us stronger, better. But it wasn't human anymore. Not after what we did." The medic stepped forward, his face a mask of anger and disgust. "You created that thing. You're telling us that you unleashed a monster." His voice was louder than it should have been, echoing in the sterile, blood-streaked lab. The technician nodded, a broken man confessing his sins. It was supposed to be the next step, a way to enhance human capabilities. But it became something else, something terrible. It killed everyone in the labs, the guards. It's hunting now, hunting anyone left alive. The weight of his words settled over us like a shroud. We weren't just dealing with a scientific mishap. We were facing something born of nightmares, a creature that had been human once, but had been twisted into something monstrous by the experiments conducted in this facility. Captain Caldwell stood there, absorbing the full horror of the situation, his expression unreadable. But I could see the tightness in his jaw, the simmering anger in his eyes. "We need to find it," Caldwell said finally, his voice hard as steel. "And we need to kill it before it kills us." The technician began to shake his head violently, his voice rising in desperation. "You can't. It's too powerful, too fast. You don't understand what you're up against. It's more than just a creature. It's a weapon designed to be unstoppable. It will tear you apart." Captain Caldwell's expression didn't change, but his eyes bore into the technician with an intensity that made the man flinch. "We faced worse, and we're still here. Now tell us, where is it?" The technician hesitated, then pointed to a door at the far end of the lab. "It's in the lower levels. That's where we kept it, before it escaped." His voice faltered, and I could see the terror in his eyes, the kind that comes from knowing you've unleashed something you can never put back in the box. We moved out, leaving the technician behind, his warnings echoing in our ears. As we descended deeper into the facility, the air grew colder and the silence more oppressive. The walls seemed to close in around us, the narrow hallways a labyrinth of shadows and dread. Each step felt like a step closer to our own doom, but there was no turning back. "Not now." Captain Caldwell led the way, his face set in grim determination. We had a job to do, and no matter what horrors awaited us in the bowels of this nightmare, we were going to see it through. We had to. Because if we didn't stop this thing, it would continue its killing spree, and more lives would be lost. And that was something none of us could live with. As we reached the lower levels, the sense of foreboding grew stronger, like a storm cloud gathering on the horizon. The creature was down here somewhere, lurking in the shadows, waiting for us. And as we stepped into the darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into a trap, one from which there might be no escape. The lower levels of the facility were a different world altogether. The walls here were older, the concrete cracked and discolored, and the air was thick with the scent of mold and something else, something rotten. It was as if we had stepped into a tomb, a place where the dead had been forgotten, left to decay in the shadows. The dim emergency lighting cast long, flickering shadows that danced on the walls, making it hard to tell what was real and what was just our minds playing tricks on us. We moved in silence, our senses sharpened by the adrenaline coursing through our veins. Every sound, every creak of the floor beneath our boots, made my heart pound in my chest. Captain Caldwell was at the front, his eyes scanning the corridor ahead with that unshakable focus that had earned him the respect of every man under his command. Behind him, the medic and I flanked the rear, our weapons raised, ready for whatever might be waiting for us in the darkness. It didn't take long to find the first sign of the creature. A trail of blood, thick and dark, smeared along the floor and up the walls as if something had been dragged, or had dragged itself, through the corridor. The metallic tang of it filled the air, mixing with the musty dampness of the place, making the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Captain Caldwell crouched down, running his fingers through the blood, his face unreadable as he assessed the situation. "It's wounded," he murmured, more to himself than to any of us. But not enough. We pressed on, following the blood trail as it wound deeper into the facility. The deeper we went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became, as if the very walls were closing in on us. The creature was down here, somewhere close, and it knew we were coming. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the occasional drip of water from the ceiling and the distant hum of the facility's failing generators. Then, without warning, it struck. One moment we were moving cautiously down the corridor, and the next, it was upon us, a blur of motion and snarling fury. The creature came out of the darkness with terrifying speed, its massive form slamming into the lead man with a force that sent him crashing into the wall. The sound of bones snapping echoed through the corridor, followed by the man's scream as he was torn apart in front of us. I barely had time to register what was happening before my training kicked in, and I was firing, the muzzle flash lighting up the corridor in brief, blinding bursts. The creature was a nightmare made flesh, a twisted amalgamation of human and something far more sinister. Its skin was a patchwork of scars and grotesque mutations, muscles bulging beneath the surface, its face a contorted mask of rage and hunger. Bullets seemed to slow it down, but not stop it, as it barreled through our line, scattering us like leaves in a storm. Captain Caldwell shouted orders, but the chaos of the moment made it impossible to hear. We were in a fight for our lives, and every instinct screamed at me to run, to get as far away from this thing as possible. But there was no escape. This was it, do or die. I saw the medic go down under the weight of the creature, his rifle wrenched from his hands as he struggled to fend off its massive jaws. There was a sickening crunch as the creature's teeth found purchase, and the medic let out a guttural cry of pain. Without thinking, I rushed forward, firing my weapon into the creature's side, hoping to draw its attention away from my fallen comrade. The bullets tore into its flesh, sending sprays of blood across the floor, but it barely seemed to notice. It turned its hideous face toward me, eyes burning with a malevolent intelligence, and I knew in that moment that we were facing something far beyond human. Captain Caldwell was suddenly there, hurling a flashbang into the air. The grenade exploded with a blinding light and deafening noise, disorienting the creature just long enough for us to regroup. The medic was bleeding badly, but still alive, though the look in his eyes told me he knew how close he had come to death. Captain Caldwell barked orders, pulling us together as we retreated down the corridor, the creature hot on our heels, its roars reverberating through the facility like thunder. We needed a plan, something more than just running and gunning. Captain Caldwell, ever the strategist, quickly outlined a desperate idea. We would lure the creature into the facility's vehicle bay, where we could use the explosives we carried to set a trap. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot we had. We moved fast, setting charges along the walls as we went, our breaths coming in ragged gasps, muscles aching from the constant strain. The medic, despite his injuries, worked with a grim determination, his hands moving quickly as he wired the explosives. The bay doors were just ahead when the creature made its final charge. It was wounded, bleeding from multiple gunshots, but still terrifyingly powerful. It crashed through the narrow corridor, its claws raking the walls, sparks flying as it bore down on us. I could see the desperation in its movements, the primal instinct to survive at any cost. We burst through the doors into the vehicle bay, and Captain Caldwell shouted for us to take cover. We dived behind the nearest vehicle as he hit the detonator. The explosion was deafening, the force of it shaking the very foundations of the facility. The blast wave hit us like a freight train, sending debris and dust billowing into the air. The creature was caught in the center of the blast, its monstrous roar cut off abruptly as the fire consumed it. The heat was intense, even from behind the cover, and for a moment, all I could hear was the ringing in my ears and the sound of my own labored breathing. When the dust finally settled, we emerged from our hiding spots, weapons at the ready, expecting to see the creature reduced to a charred husk. But what we saw instead was far more disturbing. The creature, though badly injured and barely recognizable, was still alive, dragging itself out of the wreckage with a grim determination that defied belief. Its skin was blackened and burned, chunks of flesh hanging off its bones, yet it kept moving, inch by agonizing inch. Captain Caldwell didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, his rifle raised, and with a calm precision that I will never forget, he emptied the last of his magazine into the creature's head, finally ending its reign of terror. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the crackling of flames and the distant wail of the facility's alarms. We stood there for a long moment, just staring at the smoldering remains, each of us grappling with what we had just survived. The medic slumped against the wall, his face pale, his breath coming in short, painful bursts. Captain Caldwell lowered his weapon, his expression unreadable, though I could see the exhaustion in his eyes. We had won, but at a cost that none of us could fully comprehend at that moment. The nightmare was over, but the scars it left behind were just beginning to form. As the flames from the explosion slowly died down, the silence that followed felt as heavy as the smoke that hung in the air. We stood there, the four of us, battered and bloody, trying to process the nightmare we had just survived. The medic was slumped against a wall, his breath ragged and pained, but alive. Captain Caldwell's face was etched with exhaustion, but his eyes still held that fierce determination, the kind that had carried us through countless missions before this one. But even he looked shaken, and I could see it in the way his hands trembled ever so slightly as he reloaded his weapon, just in case. We didn't have long to catch our breath before the sound of approaching vehicles reached us. The screech of tires on gravel, the heavy thud of boots hitting the ground. It was all too familiar. But these weren't reinforcements. A convoy of black SUVs rolled into the facility's courtyard, and from them emerged a group of men dressed in black tactical gear, their faces obscured by helmets and tinted visors. They moved with the precision of a well-trained unit, but there was something off about them, something that made my gut twist with unease. Captain Caldwell stepped forward, meeting them halfway, his posture tense. One of the men, clearly the leader, approached him. There were no insignias on their uniforms, no marks of rank or identification. Just black, featureless armor that gave nothing away. The leader spoke in a low, measured tone, but I was close enough to hear the exchange. "This is now a restricted area," the man said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "You and your team are to withdraw immediately. This operation is under new command." Captain Caldwell didn't back down, though I could see the muscles in his jaw clenching. "We just neutralized the threat," he replied, his voice steady but laced with the kind of authority that didn't come from rank alone. "We're not going anywhere until we know what the hell is going on here." The man in black didn't flinch. "Your mission is over, Captain. We'll take it from here." There was an edge to his tone now, a finality that brooked no argument. Caldwell stared him down for a long moment, the tension between them thick enough to cut with a knife. But in the end, he nodded, a barely perceptible motion, and turned back to us. "We're pulling out," he said, his voice carrying that same steel. "Let's move." As we gathered our gear, the men in black moved past us, entering the facility with the kind of efficiency it made it clear they had done this before. I caught a glimpse of their equipment. Advanced, top of the line. The kind you didn't see outside of the most classified operations. They weren't just here to clean up. They were here to bury whatever happened in this place, to erase it from existence. We made our way back through the forest, the eerie silence still pressing in on us. Ranger Ethan Harper was waiting for us at the edge of the woods, his face pale and drawn. He didn't say a word as we passed by, just watched us with a look that spoke of too many questions and not enough answers. I could see the fear in his eyes, the kind of fear that doesn't go away with time. It settles in, makes a home in your bones, and never lets you forget. Back at the base, the debrief was short and to the point. The higher-ups wanted a concise report, facts, no speculation, and certainly no mention of the things that couldn't be explained. We sat in that sterile, fluorescent-lit room, recounting the events in dry, clinical terms, stripping away the horror and the fear until it was just another mission gone sideways. But I could see the toll it was taking on each of us. The medic kept his eyes on the table, his hands bandaged and trembling slightly as he spoke. Captain Caldwell's answers were terse, almost mechanical, but there was an edge to his voice that told me he wasn't letting this go, not by a long shot. When it was over, they told us to take some time off, to rest and recover. But we all knew that the kind of rest they were talking about wasn't going to fix what we'd been through. The scars from that mission weren't just physical, they ran deeper, into places that no amount of downtime could heal. I found myself sitting alone later that night, the memories playing over and over in my mind. The creature, the lab, the screams. It all felt like a bad dream, but the ache in my muscles and the lingering smell of smoke on my clothes told me it was all too real. I thought about the technician's words, about the experiments and the twisted ambition that had led to this nightmare. The image of the creature's final moments, dragging itself out of the wreckage, refusing to die, haunted me. It wasn't just a monster. It was a reminder of what happens when humanity oversteps its bounds, when the line between right and wrong gets blurred in the name of progress. But what haunted me even more was the knowledge that we had only scratched the surface. The men in black, the facility, the experiments, there was more to it, more than we ever know. The questions that gnawed at me wouldn't let go. How many more of these projects were out there? How many more monsters were waiting to be unleashed? And who was really pulling the strings? Captain Caldwell didn't say much as we prepared to leave the base the next day, but I could see the same thoughts weighing on him. There was a look in his eyes, a kind of resignation mixed with determination, that told me he wasn't going to let this go. He'd seen too much, just like the rest of us, and he knew that whatever we'd uncovered was just the beginning. As we drove away from the base, the sun rising over the horizon, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were leaving something unfinished, something that would come back to haunt us. The mission was over, but the story wasn't, not by a long shot. And in the quiet of that morning, as the base disappeared in the rearview mirror, I realized that some things are better left buried. But the truth has a way of clawing its way to the surface, no matter how deep you try to bury it. And when it does, you'd better be ready for what it brings with it.